Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you, Tom. Take a big breath. We can relax now. Welcome to our Unitarian Universalist congregation. My name is Ina McBride, and I'm your worship associate this morning for this growing and journeying community. But I'm just part of a whole team of people who work together to bring this service to you either here or virtually. We welcome all of you and all of who you are. We recognize that we come from many places along different paths, bringing different realities and different beliefs. And yet we come together as one people, with faith that we can use our differences to heal ourselves and each other, to bring wholeness to a fractured world. We come seeking to find community, to find acceptance of who we are. In this place, we may find others who are much like us and others who are much different, because we draw from many sources of wisdom. Community Church offers an open pulpit. Speakers invited here are here to share their truth, whatever that is. We also practice an open pew, which means that you are not expected to agree with everything you hear here. Freedom of thought is the cornerstone of Unitarian Universalism, and even though we may not always agree, we as worship leaders hope that you find a spiritual nourishment here. Whoever you are, wherever you are welcome. First, I'd like to remind you that there's, well, as Sandy Farlow would say, a book in the nook in the back, between the two white cabinets on that shelf, where you can write any joys or concerns that you want to be brought up to this congregation today. Please feel free to rise at any time and go back there and write in the book, and we'll read from the book later in the service. Now, a special thing today, our guest speaker this morning is going to be one of our very own members, Dr. Patricia Slade Lander. She's right here. When I asked Pat how I might introduce her, Pat hesitated. Anybody who knows Pat knows that she doesn't really hesitate. Okay, so that's just in the... but she says, Unitarianism, academia, family, gayness. Pat was dedicated a Unitarian when she was 6, and many of her fondest memories are from church school lessons about plants and ice cream cones. It was different back then. Summers were at Unitarian Row Camp and later liberal religious youth, and by college, Pat had decided she would be a Unitarian minister. But someone from the Unitarian Association in Boston told her no. She should go into religious education since she was a woman. So that ended that. Pat is stubborn, there again, for those of you who know her. After that, she skipped church for 60 years and became a feminist. I know. Good for you. She chose cultural anthropology as an alternative and did research in Mexico, Scandinavia, and among lesbians in New York. She taught anthropology for 31 years at Brooklyn College until 2001, but more important, helped raise her girl-boy twins who spent half time with their father after they were 4 and half time with Pat and her lesbian partner. A surprise! Now, as a widow, she thinks Unitarianism, anthropology, and queerness are a good combination for being a grandmother in Texas. Her only regret is the gardening she left behind in New York. Oh, yes, and many hours were spent protesting the war in Vietnam, marching in pride parades, founding Grandmas Against Guns, and helping establish a pride center in Nyack, New York. Also, this quilted pride flag you see here is Pat's, and she brought to share with us. You might want to take a moment after the service to come take a closer look. She has put pins that she's collected from all those years of marching in protests and attending rallies and whatnot on this flag, and there's a little explanation on the chair here of what each one of those pins is from, and some of them go all the way back to the 60s. So thank you for sharing that with us this morning, Pat. I know we're all looking forward to hearing her message later in the service. Our responsive reading this morning is, "May we live the spirit of pride." Your words are in bold. With gratitude for the freedom to be our true, authentic selves, may we live the spirit of pride. With the courage that comes from challenging fear, may we live the spirit of pride. With sorrow for those who could not be here with us today, and in honor of those who died of AIDS or who lost their lives, may we live the spirit of pride. With grief for those whose pain is unbearable and who left us too soon, may we live the spirit of pride. Looking ahead to the justice still withheld, may we live the spirit of pride. With confidence that a sense of community banishes isolation and loneliness, may we live the spirit of pride. With the rainbow flag flying high, a sense of beloved community among us, and the joy that comes from making new connections, may we live the spirit of pride. Each of us was created in the image of love. Wherever we come from, wherever we're going, whoever we are, whomever we love, we proclaim love on our side, that our bodies are sacred, our minds are blessed, our spirits are beloved. May we be open to receive more love, always more love. Please welcome Pat Lander. It's okay. You do all of it. You do all of it. There's a glass of water for you.
Thank you. We don't have parking meters here, so just warning you, we're running a little late. It's such a nice service. And I get to see your faces because I watch from home, and I see the backs. I see who got a haircut, things like that. And I may cry, but it's all right. My wife was brought up Catholic, and one of her last coherent words were, "Don't pray for me and don't light candles for me." So my daughter asked me, "Aren't I going to light a candle?" But I can dedicate this talk to her memory, Claudette Martha Charbonneau. Okay. Good morning. I am happy to speak with you today during Pride Month. Let me be clear, I am not an expert. I simply have read a lot recently while on the welcoming committee and was once an activist. I speak as an 83-year-old Unitarian anthropologist who lived many years as a committed heterosexual until realizing in 1978, at age 37, that I had fallen in love with a female colleague in the Women's Studies program at Brooklyn College. After an awkward transition, including 4-year-old twins, one of whom is here today, thank you, we lived together in New York as partners, then wives, for 40 years, until her death 5 years and 2 weeks ago. Everyone's life history is a history of becoming. This morning, and always, as Kiki reminded us, we should all try to be aware of pride issues and offer shelter to all guests as a welcoming congregation. Queer or non-queer, each one of us is special and precious, that we know. We are also united as members and friends of a church which has been attacked because of our support for the gay queer community, reminding us that diversity may be seen as suspect by some. Our flag is flying today, but it has been stolen a few times. And we have a new one waiting to go up. Now, why do we celebrate Pride in June? Because Stonewall was important. The most recent phase of the gay rights movement started 55 years ago with the Stonewall Uprising of June 28 to July 3, 1969. At 1:20 a.m., 8 officers of the public moral section of the New York City Police entered the Mafia-run bar, rumored to be the only bar which allowed same-sex dancing in Greenwich Village, New York. The customers who became protesters included gay men, lesbians, drag queens, bisexuals, and trans women of color. Everyone remembers they were there these days. That night, as police were filling their vans, a crowd gathered. Someone shouted, "Fight back," and threw a brick. Bottles flew. A fire broke out in the bar. The police actually retreated to the bar, and then a fire broke out. Fists flew, and the neighborhood was never the same. Remember, this was the time of protests against the Vietnam War, the rise of the Black Panthers, the second wave of feminism, and Woodstock. It was a time of lots of sexual and political energy. And finally, a more organized gay movement joined the culture of protest after decades of being mostly invisible. It was time to come out noisily. A year after Stonewall, and each year thereafter, large gay pride marches have taken place in New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, and beyond. There's one going on now in New York, but Dallas celebrated June 2nd with actor Billy Porter as Grand Marshal in the Allen Ross Texas Freedom Parade in Thayer Park. And some of you were there, or at least one of you was there. By 1977, gays, a term from the 1930s, started marching with an 8-color, later 6-color pride flag designed in San Francisco by Gilbert Baker, an openly gay veteran. Today, many fly the Progress Pride flag. I think you got a little take-home thing with that, no? It was designed by Daniel Quasar, a non-binary artist in Portland, Oregon, in 2018, incorporating colors from the more than 25 different flags. I only have 11 here, but there are 25 different ones, but Amazon doesn't carry them all. With stories of evolving identities, part of some 72 or more named gender identities. I brought the list if you want to see it at Church Chat. If it was the Gay Pride March, where did queer come from? Someone asked me this morning. Though the word queer has been traced back to about 1500 when it meant peculiar or eccentric, queer was often considered derogatory, but it took on new meaning when Queer Nation was founded in 1990 in New York, growing out of the earlier ACT UP, to protest loudly against violence to gays and the exclusion of gays from medical trials on AIDS. Protests which had begun in Washington, D.C. in 1987, when quilt squares represented those already lost, and those squares woke many up for the first time to the existence of gay friends and relatives. Their slogan, Queer Nation's slogan, was, "We're here, we're queer, get used to it." Queer Nation insisted on being visible by staging queer night out events and public kiss-ins and noisy protests, asking for modern medical trials. They went to shopping malls, to suburbia, they tried to get into St. Pat's, I know. Queer Nation and ACT UP transformed public perceptions and also encouraged transgender groups and people of color to come back after some earlier tense times provoked by the declaration that gay was okay, and it didn't say anything about trans in the 70s. So there were earlier tense times between trans and lesbians and gay. Queer has continued to be used in a more political sense, and today many younger folk insist on queer rather than gay, though it is not universal. Queer has the force of a declaration that we want acknowledgement and respect. It's a strong vote against compulsory heterosexuality. That's what goes around, when you're born, without revealing more than one wants. I'd like to take a quick look at our queer community, remembering the limits of generalization. Much is left out, but here's a sample, starting with lesbians, of course. Lesbians, Sappho, Audre Lorde, and Nikki Giovanni. At the time of Stonewall, the National Organization of Women was 3 years old. Lesbians and women of color did not always feel welcome, especially when lesbians were labeled the Lavender Menace by Betty Friedan, first president of NOW. We bonded over shared potluck suppers, coming out stories, including wondering about Margaret Mead and Eleanor Roosevelt, and political actions, discrimination, and child custody were serious issues. Women's music, still around. Poetry, even going back to the love poems of Sappho from Lesbos, 7th century BC, and short story writing also helped develop a modern lesbian community. Open reading, small press publishing, and feminist bookstores gave women control over their own message and their work, especially in the 70s to 90s. And lesbian herstory archives collected materials from the past, and today celebrate 50 years. There are a lot of 50-year celebrations going on of sisterhood. And remember lesbian bars, softball games, and rural communities of land dykes, fewer in number, but not gone. Audre and Rich Audre Lorde and Nikki Giovanni brought the oppression of women, lesbians, and blacks to public attention. Audre Lorde emphasized the responsibility of a poet to speak the truth, even when the poet was afraid of speaking. On the issue of identity, she said, "I am not one piece of myself. I cannot be simply a black person and not be a woman too, nor can I be a woman without being a lesbian." Today, Nikki Giovanni, 80, but I'm 83, and we got to keep going. I hope they give a shot to Biden. Today, Nikki Giovanni is a personal poet, writer, storyteller, commentator, and activist. She was quite militant in her early days in the Black arts movement, but today stresses her faith in the power of all women. Women will take us to Mars, she says. She made a film about that, while stressing respect, flexibility, and love. One of her many poems, called Love Is, and love is our theme today, reads, "Some people forget that love is tucking you in and kissing you goodnight, no matter how young or old you are. Some people don't remember that love is listening and laughing and asking questions, no matter what your age. Few recognize that love is commitment, responsibility, no fun at all, unless love is you and me." Today, many lesbians identify as queer women, and I am pleased when I see their leadership, including Kelly Robinson, President, Human Rights Campaign, and our own Reverend Dr. Sophia Betancourt, did you know? President, Unitarian Universalist Association. On a recent Zoom gathering of church women, she closed with these words: "Choosing to live one's life guided by what love asks of us cannot help but drive us to work together in community until everyone is free. Okay, bisexuals. Freud believed that all humans are bisexual, incorporating aspects of both sexes. Still, bisexual leaders say they are often invisible or misunderstood. Lambda Legal wrote recently that more of the younger generations of queer folk are calling themselves bisexuals or bisexuals plus, but are often invisible in the queer gay community and may not be included in legal cases, which could have serious consequences. Lambda Legal does a lot, so you have to connect with them if you need their help. The Book of Pride, come browse the 10 books that I'm giving to the church today. The Book of Pride, LGBT Heroes Who Changed the World, tells us the bisexuals have been active a good while. Lani Kahumanu worked successfully before the huge 1993 March on Washington to have bi included in the banners. First, it was just LG. But the committee put her as last speaker of 18 and insisted on bi, not bisexual. That sounds too sexual. She was mad. Lani has written, quote, "There's an erasure that happens. It's overwhelming, makes me cranky a lot of times, and lots of people burn out. I don't know what the resistance is. We've got to educate and educate. But some people are still so stuck in this either-or kind of thing. I've never lived in an either-or world in my whole life. My life has always been both and, actually all and. It's all and. And I'm so glad I'm mentoring, and there's so many young bisexuals coming up, and transgender people, and pansexuals, and sexuals, and fluids, and whatever you want to call yourself. Yes, just do it, please." Gay men, and it started out gay liberation, right? And they thought it was them and everyone, but we added to it. Gay men. There's much social history that we don't have time for about the communities and mores of gay men, which have varied over time and place, now even including a debate about a possible gay male couple depicted in an ancient Egyptian tomb. They're kissing, but no, someone says no, they must be Siamese twins, they're so called. Anything to avoid what's going on. Gay men developed their own language to find out each other in each era. I didn't know this. Red ties, bleached hair. In earlier days, later different messages with handkerchiefs, that I knew about. Some subcultures focused on sexual styles, some on civil rights. And one historian just says, find out who was at Carnegie Hall when Judy Garland sang. It was 1973, a year when hippie styles were replaced by a denim look, when the American Psychiatric Association made history by issuing a resolution stating that homosexuality was not a mental disease or sickness. It all got very complicated. Off the couches and into the streets had been a liberation slogan, and there is a long, tense history between gays and psychiatrists, trans and therapists, etc. Stay away. That's just one opinion. The Declaration is said to have helped people's self-esteem and shifted public opinion somewhat. Still, it was only in June 2015, 42 years later, that same-sex marriage was approved in all states, yes, Massachusetts first, etc., by the Supreme Court. A goal for most, but not all queer people. Not everyone was rushing to get married. I got married in 2003 in Canada. Yay, Canada. But we needed to work on it here. I don't have statistics, but I keep seeing gay men with babies. From CNN's Anderson Cooper to Pete Buttigieg and husband Johnston, the governor of Colorado and his first man, and some New York friends, several New York friends. And one couple was surprised with the birth of 3 girls, twins and a singleton. The guys got it really going. There is a difference whether one has gone through the surrogate route, quite expensive, or found a child through adoption. Almost impossible until recently, though Pete and Johnston are raising a pair of adopted girl-boy interracial twins. But this doesn't mean that everything is okay. There are still stories of parents' disapproval when a boy tells them he's gay, sometimes even causing him to leave home, and that would be true for a child of any gender and uncooperative parents. Some parents are okay. So, various organizations have been established to help. PFLAG, Parents of Lesbians and Gay, works to educate parents and the general public about queer kids. The Trevor Project, I think we contributed to the Trevor Project, works to create a safe space and support for all queer kids with a focus on preventing suicide. And near here, Frisco Pride sponsors many activities for all ages. Check them out. They really have a lot, and really for all ages. There's a health fair going on today from 10 to 2 or something. Okay, transgender or trans. At the time I retired from teaching anthropology and women's studies 23 years ago, I probably knew more about the extent of trans folk in history and cross-culturally. Hijras in India, two-spirited people among Native Americans, than about trans and intersex people in the United States. There was and is still much to discover. Here's a little. It was fun to discover that we have a court record from 1629, wherein the General Court of the Virginia colony declared, after much confusion, that Thomas Hall was both man and woman and should dress in male clothing but with apron and female bonnet. Compromise. I recently learned, and some of you may know, but it's sort of a secret. I recently learned that there was a pre-Stonewall trans explosion known as the Compton Cafeteria Riots of August 1966 in San Francisco's Tenderloin District, started with a thrown cup of hot coffee. The 70s and 80s saw progress and backlash, but the 1990s saw a revival of trans activism. By 1995, many formerly LGB organizations finally added T to be known as LGBT, seeing transgender as part of the anti-heteronormative mix, a mix of various sexual orientations and gender identities. This is the time when Leslie Feinberg brought out the pamphlet Transgender Liberation, a movement whose time has come, with a Marxist twist, in 1992, followed by novel Stone Butch Blues in 93, and Transgender Warriors, look into it, it's fun, in 96. Z-E, which can be she, he, right? Z spoke out for trans rights in the widest sense, broadening the concept of transgender to go beyond transsexual and suggesting that gender could be revised, remixed, reworked, and include non-binary too. Leslie saw here, HIR, for her or his, own identity and pronouns change as Z began transitioning from female to male in the 1980s, before later deciding to live again as a masculine lesbian activist. It can be done, tricky, but it can be done. I met Leslie at the City University and saw a dedicated activist who wanted to be a bridge between gay and trans, stressed by misdiagnosed Lyme disease, which she attributed to doctors by being uncomfortable with queer bodies. You know, there's a story of a trans kid going into the emergency room with a broken arm, and they get scared. Maybe it'll calm down. I'm almost done. If queer stories at times project stress or sadness, there are also joyful accounts. Rodrigo Hengi-Lehtinen, the executive director of the National Center for Transgender Equality, tells how for him a fog lifted at age 21 when he began wearing men's clothes and his parents were supportive. He's asking for more positive stories to reach the public. There are some, if you look. When Amy Schneider became the most successful woman ever to compete on Jeopardy, she came out as a trans woman. In her memoir, she wonders why she was so blind and so slow. She recalls having had surprisingly intense feelings, but for her, quote, being trans didn't seem like a possibility. Because trans people know, right? That's the story. They knew from the moment they were born that they were in the wrong body, end quote. That image that Amy Schneider had of being born trans is a common one about which scientists disagree. A baby is born into a sea of gender reflected in parenting-style dress toys. Children are seen as gender neutral for probably 2.5. But by 2.5, most children have a self-concept that they're a boy or a girl, or for a rather small minority, other. When the child's sex assigned at birth differed from their self-image, psychologists earlier spoke of gender identity disorder. But recently there's been a cultural shift, which led to a redefinition in 2013. That's only 11 years ago when people say, what's the explosion? Well, there was a change when the term was changed to gender dysphoria, accompanied by changes in approaches to care. This became the new frontier. Trans kids became a new social category of gender nonconformity. But beware, as clinics expanded in the past few years and as trans activism has increased, the right-wing religious and political lobby has become more vocal, trying to create a moral panic, and various 20-odd states, including Texas, have legislated stops to trans care. There was a ruling Friday, 2 days ago, that finally said, oh no, it really is true, you can't do this in Texas. But we also found out Monday of this past week that the Supreme Court, did you know that? The Supreme Court will weigh in next term on the transgender care issue at the request of Lambda Legal, U.S. government, and others. That's scary, but we'll see. My ending. As with abortion issues, we find the courts are telling us how to care for our bodies. Biology has become politics, and even so-called medical opinions often reflect the life story and politics of individual caregivers. Choose your doctors well. This is a story to watch. A final thought. My existence is resistance. Has at times been the motto for different gay and queer people, as well as some people of color, Indigenous youth, and disabled persons. Together, our existence is resistance. We must stand together, resist, protest, vote, and push for a realization that there is beauty in diversity. We all deserve respect and good care in a politically and ecologically stressed universe. Take good care. Thank you.